If you were driving home on a chilly autumn night and saw flames flickering in the distance, would you stop to investigate or continue on your way? Prepare yourself for a deeply moving story that will take you through darkness into light, a tale of cruelty confronted by extraordinary courage. This heart-wrenching journey of survival against impossible odds might just renew your faith in humanity when you need it most. In the rural outskirts of Blackwater Ridge, Montana, where the wilderness presses close against scattered farmhouses and the nearest neighbor might be miles away, a tiny calico kitten with emerald eyes and unusual markings that resembled a butterfly on her forehead had known only harshness and neglect. Her name would eventually be Phoenix, though in the beginning she was merely that mangy cat to the man who considered her nothing but a nuisance to be eliminated. Thaddeus Mercer was a 52-year-old recluse who lived in a dilapidated farmhouse inherited from his grandfather, a property that had fallen into disrepair as Thaddeus descended deeper into alcoholism and paranoia. His reputation in the small community was one of hostility and unpredictability, his interactions with others limited to terse transactions at the general store and occasional confrontations when his hunting strayed onto others' land. Animals that wandered onto his property often disappeared, a fact locals noted but rarely discussed. Zara Okafor was 34, a wildlife biologist conducting research on wolverine populations in the nearby mountains for the University of Montana. She had rented a cabin 10 miles from Thaddeus's property, spending her days tracking animals through the forests and her evenings analyzing data and writing reports. Zara had always been drawn to wild, remote places and had a particular affinity for creatures others found difficult to love. The predators, the misunderstood, the animals that didn't fit neatly into the category of cute or cuddly. The unforgiving Montana winter was approaching, the nights growing longer and colder as November deepened toward December. Phoenix, barely 8 weeks old and completely alone after her mother and siblings had vanished one by one from Thaddeus's barn, survived by her wits and a resilience that seemed outsized in her tiny, undernourished body. She learned to hunt mice despite her youth, to find warm places to sleep in the decaying outbuildings, and most importantly, to stay out of Thaddeus's sight. On this particular Friday evening, as the temperature dropped and the first snowflakes began to swirl in the darkening sky, Phoenix made a critical mistake. Driven by hunger and the desperate cold, she ventured too close to the farmhouse, slipping through a broken basement window in search of warmth and perhaps forgotten food. The basement was musty, but mercifully warm, heated by the ancient furnace that groaned and rattled as it fought against the encroaching winter. For a few precious hours, Phoenix experienced something close to comfort. She found a pile of old blankets in a corner, their smell unpleasant to her sensitive nose, but their warmth irresistible to her chilled body. She even discovered a half-empty can of tuna fish in an overflowing trash bin, a feast that seemed miraculous after days of struggling to catch enough mice to sustain her growing body. With a full belly and a warm place to rest, she curled into a tight ball and fell into a deep sleep. The sound of heavy footsteps on the stairs jerked Phoenix from her slumber, her heart instantly racing with fear as her eyes adjusted to the darkness. Thaddeus had come to the basement to check the furnace, a bottle of whiskey dangling from his fingers as he muttered to himself about the cold and the cost of heating oil. At first he didn't notice the tiny kitten frozen in terror beside the blankets, but when Phoenix shifted slightly, trying to make herself smaller, the movement caught his bleary attention. "Vermin!" he spat, setting down the whiskey bottle with deliberate care that contrasted sharply with the rage blooming on his weathered face. "Goddamn cats breeding all over my property." He lurched toward her, his movements unsteady from alcohol, but his intent unmistakable. Phoenix darted away, a streak of calico fur searching desperately for escape, but the basement windows were too high for her to reach, and Thaddeus stood blocking the stairs, the only other exit from the room. What happened next would replay in Phoenix's primitive memory for months to come. The rough hands grabbing her by the scruff, the helpless sensation of being lifted and carried up the stairs, out into the biting cold of the November night. She struggled and clawed, her tiny body twisting with a desperate strength born of terror. But Thaddeus's grip was unyielding, his fingers pressing cruelly into her delicate skin as he carried her across the yard towards something that sent waves of instinctive fear through her small frame. A bonfire blazed in the side yard, A massive pile of autumn debris, fallen branches, dead leaves, and broken furniture, transformed into a roaring inferno that sent sparks spiraling up toward the star-strewn sky. Thaddeus had been burning trash and yard waste all afternoon, the flames now reaching 6 feet high, crackling and consuming everything fed into their hungry orange depths. The heat hit Phoenix like a wall as they approached, her struggles intensifying as some primal understanding of the danger flared in her young mind. "Problem solved," Thaddeus slurred, swinging Phoenix by the scruff as he prepared to throw her into the heart of the flames. In that moment of suspended horror, headlights swept across the yard as a vehicle turned into the rutted driveway. Zara Okafor had been returning from a day of fieldwork, taking the back road that passed Thaddeus's property as a shortcut back to her rented cabin. The unusual sight of a massive bonfire had caught her attention, concern over potential forest fire danger in the dry conditions prompting her to stop and investigate. Zara's truck skidded to a halt on the gravel, her headlights illuminating the scene like a macabre theater spotlight. Thaddeus standing before the roaring fire, a tiny, struggling kitten dangling from his grasp. The tableau was so shocking, so unexpected, that for a fraction of a second Zara couldn't process what she was seeing. That hesitation ended the instant Thaddeus, either not noticing her arrival or not caring, drew back his arm and hurled Phoenix toward the flames with a casual cruelty that seemed almost nonchalant. "No!" The word tore from Zara's throat as she flung herself from the truck, moving before conscious thought could form. Phoenix's tiny body arced through the air, a small shadow against the brilliant orange of the flames, a soundless cry seeming to emanate from her as gravity pulled her toward the searing heat. Time seemed to stretch and distort as Zara sprinted across the yard, her mind calculating trajectories and possibilities, even as her heart pounded with a desperate need to reach the kitten before the unthinkable happened. The heat of the bonfire scorched Zara's face as she lunged forward, arms outstretched, her researcher's jacket catching embers as she intercepted Phoenix's fall at the very edge of the fire. The momentum carried them both dangerously close to the flames, Zara's boots slipping on the cold ground as she clutched the kitten to her chest and twisted away from the inferno. Pain seared across her forearm, where a burning branch had contacted her skin, but all that mattered was the small, trembling life she'd managed to catch, the tiny heart she could feel racing against her palm. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Thaddeus bellowed, his face contorted with rage as he staggered towards Zara and Phoenix. The kitten trembled violently in Zara's protective grasp, her tiny body seemingly trying to burrow deeper into the safety of the woman's arms. Embers from the bonfire swirled around them like malevolent fireflies, the heat pressing against their backs as Zara straightened and faced the advancing man. Zara's heart hammered in her chest, adrenaline coursing through her veins as she assessed her situation with the rapid clarity that had served her well in wilderness emergencies. Thaddeus was larger than her, obviously intoxicated and enraged. The property was isolated, her phone was in her truck, and the tiny creature in her arms needed immediate attention. "I'm leaving," she said firmly, backing away toward her vehicle, "and I'm taking this kitten with me." "That's my property," Thaddeus snarled, gesturing wildly toward Phoenix, whose emerald eyes were wide with terror, pupils dilated to black pools that reflected the dancing flames. "Vermin breeding everywhere, eating my food, carrying disease." His justification was as incoherent as it was cruel, the words slurring together as he advanced on Zara with menacing intent. The acrid stench of whiskey and unwashed clothes seemed to emanate from him in waves, mixing with the smoke that swirled around them in the cold night air. Phoenix, sensing the escalating danger, made a soft, distressed sound against Zara's chest. Not quite a meow, more a vibration of pure fear that traveled from her tiny body into Zara's. The sound, so small, yet so full of terror, crystallized something in Zara's mind, a determination that hardened her resolve like steel being tempered in flame. This man had tried to burn a living creature alive, an act of such casual cruelty that it defied comprehension, and she would not allow him one more second of power over this vulnerable life. "This ends now," Zara stated, her voice cutting through the night with unexpected authority. She continued her steady retreat toward her truck, one hand protectively cradling Phoenix, while the other reached for her phone. "What you are about to do is a felony in this state, animal cruelty with intent to kill. I'm calling the sheriff." The threat seemed to penetrate Thaddeus's alcohol-fogged brain, uncertainty flickering across his face as he processed potential consequences. But then his expression darkened further, calculation replacing momentary hesitation. "No signal out here," he said, a sinister smile spreading across his weathered face as he pulled something from his jacket pocket, the gleam of metal catching the firelight. A hunting knife with a serrated edge that he brandished with alarming confidence despite his intoxication. "No witnesses either. Just my word against yours, city girl, if you even make it off my property." The threat hung in the air between them, as tangible as the smoke from the bonfire. And Phoenix sensed the shift in energy, her tiny body going rigid with renewed terror. Zara's mind raced through options, calculating risks with the same analytical precision she applied to her research data. She was still 15 feet from her truck. Phoenix needed medical attention for possible burns and smoke inhalation, and the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Engaging physically with Thaddeus would be dangerous, especially with a knife involved, but turning her back completely would make her vulnerable to attack. Each second that passed was another moment of trauma for the already injured Kitten trembling against her heart. The sound of an approaching engine broke the tense standoff, headlights sweeping across the property as a battered pickup truck pulled into the driveway behind Zara's vehicle. Thaddeus's attention jerked toward this new arrival, the knife momentarily lowering as confusion crossed his face. Phoenix took advantage of the distraction to shift position in Zara's arms, tiny claws digging into the woman's jacket as she sought a more secure hold. Her survival instinct still firing on all cylinders despite her exhaustion and fear. The truck door slammed, and a tall figure emerged. Hawkins Reed, the local game warden whose territory included this remote section of Blackwater Ridge. His arrival wasn't entirely coincidental. He'd been tracking reports of illegal hunting in the area and had noticed the unusually large bonfire while on patrol. "Everything all right here?" he called, his deep voice carrying across the yard as he approached, one hand casually resting on the service weapon at his hip, eyes taking in the scene with professional assessment. Thaddeus hastily concealed the knife, his demeanor shifting with remarkable speed from threatening to artificially congenial. "Just a misunderstanding, Hawkins," he called, an unconvincing smile stretching across his face. "This woman trespassed on my property, that's all." The lie came easily to him, but his unsteady stance and slurred words undermined any credibility he might have had. Phoenix, sensing the dynamic changing again, dared to peek out from the protective cocoon of Zara's arms, her nose twitching as she scented this new human entering the volatile situation. "She was trying to throw this kitten into that fire," Zara stated clearly, her voice steady despite the lingering adrenaline coursing through her system. She held Phoenix slightly forward, allowing the game warden to see the singed fur on the kitten's tail and paws, the evidence of how close the tiny creature had come to an unimaginable death. "I pulled her out just in time. He was going to burn her alive." The bald truth of what had nearly happened hung in the air, stark and undeniable in its horror. Hawkins Reed had seen many disturbing things in his 15 years as a game warden. Poaching, animal abuse, the casual cruelty that some people inflicted on wildlife. But the sight of the trembling kitten, its fur still smoking slightly from proximity to the flames, sparked a cold anger in him that was reflected in his narrowed eyes. "That true, Mercer?" he asked, his tone deceptively conversational as he moved closer, positioning himself subtly between Zara and Thaddeus. Phoenix watched this new human with wary interest, her survival depending on correctly assessing potential threats and allies. "She's lying," Thaddeus spat, but his eyes shifted away, unable to meet the game warden's steady gaze. "That cat's a stray, been killing birds around here, was just cleaning up my property." The justification rang hollow even to his own ears, and Phoenix, as if understanding she was being discussed, let out a pitiful mew that seemed to underscore the absurdity of claiming an 8-week-old kitten could be a menacing predator. The sound, so small yet so poignant, seemed to hang in the cold night air. "I saw him throw her," Zara insisted, checking Phoenix for injuries as she spoke. The kitten's whiskers were singed, and one paw looked raw where it had briefly contacted a hot ember, but miraculously, she had avoided severe burns thanks to Zara's quick intervention. "I have a dash cam in my truck that might have caught it too." This was a calculated bluff. Her research vehicle did have a camera, but Zara wasn't certain it would have captured the incident clearly from its angle in the driveway. Hawkins nodded slowly, years of experience helping him sort truth from lies even in this chaotic situation. "Why don't you take that kitten to Doc Abernathy's clinic in town?" he suggested to Zara, his eyes never leaving Thaddeus. "It's after hours, but his emergency number is on the door. Tell him Hawkins sent you." His hand remained casually near his weapon, a silent warning to Thaddeus that any further aggression would be unwise. Phoenix, exhausted by trauma and fear, finally allowed her tiny body to go limp in Zara's arms, surrendering to the protection being offered. "You can't just take my property," Thaddeus protested, but the words lacked conviction now, self-preservation beginning to override his rage as he registered the official presence and the potential consequences of his actions. Phoenix flinched at the sound of his voice, a Pavlovian response to the source of trauma that made Zara instinctively cup a protective hand over the kitten's small head, shielding her from even the sight of the man who had tried to end her life so callously. Zara backed toward her truck, unwilling to turn her back on Thaddeus despite Hawkins's presence. "I'll file a report," she promised the game warden, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "Photos, statement, everything." Phoenix watched the exchange with widened eyes, her tiny heart still racing but the immediate terror beginning to subside as she sensed they were moving away from danger. The gentle way Zara held her was unlike anything the kitten had experienced in her short, harsh life. Dr. Ezekiel Abernathy's veterinary clinic was dark when Zara arrived, but true to Hawkins's word, an emergency number was posted on the door. The elderly veterinarian answered on the second ring, and upon hearing the circumstances, told Zara he would meet her at the clinic in 15 minutes. Phoenix remained unnervingly still during the drive, her tiny body occasionally shivering despite the truck's heater, working at full blast. Only the faint rise and fall of her chest assured Zara that the kitten was still fighting to survive. "You're going to be okay," Zara whispered, one finger gently stroking Phoenix's head as they waited in the parking lot. The kitten's eyes, those remarkable emerald orbs that somehow seemed too knowing for such a young animal, blinked slowly in response, a small gesture that felt like trust beginning to form. It was hard to believe that less than an hour ago, this tiny creature had been moments away from an unimaginable death, her short life nearly ended by inexplicable cruelty before it had truly begun. Dr. Abernathy arrived driving a vintage Volvo that had seen better days, his movements spry despite his 70-plus years as he unlocked the clinic and ushered Zara inside. Under the bright examination lights, Phoenix's injuries became more apparent. Singed fur, minor burns on her paws and tail, signs of malnourishment that predated tonight's trauma, and the telltale symptoms of respiratory distress from smoke inhalation. The kitten submitted to examination with unusual passivity, as if understanding that this discomfort was different from the cruelty she had known before. "She's a fighter, Doctor," Abernathy declared after a thorough check, his voice gruff but kind, as he prepared an oxygen chamber for the smoke inhalation and gathered supplies to treat the burns. "Severely malnourished and dehydrated, probably been on her own for weeks, but no permanent damage from tonight that I can see." He worked with gentle efficiency, his weathered hands surprisingly delicate as he applied burn cream to Phoenix's paws and administered fluids for her dehydration. The kitten watched him with those intelligent green eyes, flinching occasionally, but not fighting the treatment. While Phoenix received oxygen therapy in a small chamber that looked like a futuristic fish tank, Zara called the sheriff's department to file a formal report about the incident. The dispatcher, initially skeptical about what sounded like a minor animal control issue, became notably more concerned when Zara mentioned that Game Warden Reed was already involved and that the situation had escalated to threats with a weapon. Phoenix, watching Zara pace as she made the call, seemed to follow the woman's movements with an intensity that went beyond normal feline curiosity. "The sheriff's deputy wants photos of her injuries," Zara told Dr. Abernathy, ending the call with a sigh of frustration at bureaucratic procedures that seemed inadequate in the face of such cruelty. The veterinarian nodded grimly, already documenting the burns and respiratory symptoms with his clinic's digital camera, his methodical approach suggesting this wasn't the first abuse case he had helped build evidence for. Phoenix, temporarily removed from the oxygen chamber for the documentation, remained unnaturally still, as if understanding the importance of the process. "What will happen to her?" Zara asked, as Dr. Abernathy returned Phoenix to the oxygen therapy. The question had been forming in her mind since the moment she'd lunged for the kitten at the edge of the bonfire, a growing certainty taking shape alongside it. The veterinarian glanced up, a knowing look in his eyes as he recognized the tone in Zara's voice. He had heard it many times before, from people who had intervened in an animal's suffering and found themselves unable to walk away. "County Animal Control is overrun as usual," he said matter-of-factly, checking Phoenix's oxygen levels as the kitten's breathing gradually became less labored inside the chamber. They'd take her, but this time of year, with resources stretched thin, he trailed off, the implication clear. Phoenix pressed a tiny paw against the transparent wall of the chamber, seeming to reach toward Zara, the gesture so deliberate it was difficult to believe it was coincidental. Something unspoken passed between woman and kitten, a connection forged in those terrible moments by the bonfire. Zara had not come to Montana looking for a pet. Her work was demanding, her rented cabin barely large enough for her research equipment, and her lifestyle not conducive to caring for another living being. Yet as she watched Phoenix's steady gaze through the oxygen chamber wall, Zara felt the weight of a decision that seemed to have already made itself in the moment she'd lunged toward the flames. "I'll take her," she said simply, the words feeling right as soon as they left her mouth. Phoenix seemed to relax slightly, as if understanding the significance of the declaration. Dr. Abernathy smiled faintly, no surprise in his expression as he continued monitoring Phoenix's vital signs. "I thought you might," he said, reaching for a clipboard to begin the paperwork. "She'll need follow-up care for those burns, medication for the respiratory issues, special food to address the malnourishment." His tone was clinical, but the look he gave Zara was approving. "And a name unless you're planning to keep calling her the kitten." The question hung in the air as Phoenix blinked those remarkable green eyes, seeming to await Zara's decision on this matter of identity. "Phoenix," Zara said without hesitation, the name having formed in her mind somewhere between pulling the kitten from the edge of the flames and arriving at the veterinary clinic. "Her name is Phoenix. Dr. Me." Abernathy nodded, writing it on the chart with a flourish, the symbolism not lost on him. The mythical bird reborn from fire, given new life from the ashes of destruction. Inside the oxygen chamber, the newly named Phoenix stretched one small paw, claws extending briefly as if trying on the identity, accepting the designation that acknowledged both her trauma and her survival. The sheriff's deputy arrived while Phoenix was still receiving oxygen therapy, a stern-faced woman named Deputy Torres, who took Zara's statement with professional detachment that gradually gave way to obvious concern as the full story unfolded. She photographed Phoenix's injuries herself, adding these to Dr. Abernathy's documentation, and informed Zara that Game Warden Reed had remained at Thaddeus Mercer's property to ensure no evidence was destroyed before investigators could arrive in the morning. Phoenix watched the deputy with wary interest, her experience with humans thus far providing little reason to trust those in authority. "We've had complaints about Mercer before," Deputy Torres admitted, reviewing her notes as she prepared to leave. "Nothing we could prove, but local farmers reported finding mutilated wildlife on their properties bordering his land. And the mailman mentioned concerning conditions for livestock on his property." Her expression darkened as she glanced at Phoenix, now sleeping in the oxygen chamber, the kitten's tiny sides rising and falling with each breath. "But this is different. A deliberate act witnessed by a credible observer with evidence. We can make this one stick." By the time Phoenix was released from oxygen therapy, it was nearly dawn, the clinic's windows beginning to show the faint grey light of approaching day. Dr. Abernathy provided a small carrier lined with soft blankets, medication for pain and respiratory support, special high-calorie food for malnourished animals, and detailed instructions for home care of the burns. "She'll need to come back in 3 days to check her lungs and change the burn dressings," he said, gently placing Phoenix in the carrier. The kitten went willingly, her strength depleted by trauma and treatment, her tiny body curling into an exhausted ball once settled on the soft blanket. Zara's cabin was chilly when they arrived, the automated thermostat programmed for her usual return time later in the day. She quickly adjusted the heat, then set Phoenix's carrier in the bathroom, while she created a makeshift bed from a cardboard box and old towels, set up a small litter box from supplies Dr. Abernathy had provided, and prepared a space for food and water bowls. Throughout these preparations, Phoenix watched from the carrier with those intelligent green eyes, observing her new environment with the caution of an animal who had learned that safety could be an illusion. When everything was ready, Zara opened the carrier door and sat back, allowing Phoenix to emerge on her own terms. The kitten hesitated, sniffing the air cautiously, then took a tentative step out of the carrier, her movements stiff from injuries and exhaustion. Her first act in her new home was to approach Zara slowly, cautiously, and then in a gesture that brought unexpected tears to the woman's eyes, Phoenix placed one small bandaged paw on Zara's hand, a deliberate contact that felt like gratitude, recognition, the sealing of a pact formed in fire and rescue. The first week with Phoenix was a delicate balance of medical care and building trust. Zara administered medication every 6 hours, changed burn dressings daily, and monitored the kitten constantly. Despite the discomfort, Phoenix submitted to treatments with remarkable patience, those emerald eyes watching Zara with growing trust, as if understanding this human's touch was meant to heal rather than harm. Phoenix's true personality emerged as her health improved, a playful streak that surfaced between periods of recovery, an insatiable curiosity, and a melodic voice used with great effect. She developed specific meows for different needs, a chirping trill for attention, a soft murmur when content, and a distinctive cry that meant hunger. Zara found herself charmed by this small creature's determination to communicate across the species barrier. Deputy Torres called on the 5th day with news. "We've arrested Mercer. After executing a search warrant, we found evidence of multiple animal cruelty cases, remains in his barn, disturbing photos, specialized equipment." Phoenix, sensing Zara's reaction, pressed a small paw against her hand as if offering comfort. "He's being charged with felony animal cruelty, illegal wildlife trafficking, and assault with a deadly weapon for pulling the knife on you." Dr. Abernathy was impressed by Phoenix's follow-up appointment. "She's young, which helps," he explained, examining her healing paws. "Their capacity for recovery at this age is extraordinary." More remarkable was her psychological resilience. Many animals who experience such trauma develop lasting behavioral issues, but she seems to understand that what happened was an aberration, not the norm. The observation gave voice to what Zara had noticed: Phoenix's capacity for trust, despite experiences that should have taught her to fear humans. 2 weeks after the rescue, Phoenix's transformation was striking. Her calico coat grew fuller and shinier, her frame filled out with proper nutrition, and the butterfly marking on her forehead became distinct against her orange and black patches. Her vibrant emerald eyes remained her most striking feature, unusual in cats, and even more remarkable against her calico pattern. Testifying at Thaddeus's preliminary hearing proved emotionally challenging, but necessary. In the imposing courthouse, Zara recounted in clear terms what she had witnessed. Judge Orla Blackwood listened intently as photographic evidence was presented, Phoenix's injuries and the disturbing findings from Thaddeus's property. When the defense attempted to minimize the incident as a farmer dealing with a pest, Judge Blackwood's response was swift. "Farmers respect life, even when they must end it humanely. What your client did shows contempt for life, not respect." The trial proceeded swiftly by legal standards. Game Warden Reed's testimony corroborated Zara's account, and the forensic evidence from Thaddeus's property painted a disturbing picture of escalating cruelty. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning a unanimous guilty verdict on all counts. Judge Blackwood sentenced Thaddeus to 5 years in state prison, the maximum allowed, citing the calculated cruelty and complete lack of remorse as factors in her decision. At home, Phoenix continued her remarkable recovery. By the 1-month mark, only a slight kink in her tail and a small bald patch on one paw remained as physical reminders of her ordeal. She developed an unexpected passion for perching on Zara's shoulders as she worked, overseeing the wildlife biologist's data analysis with supervisory importance. Her tendency to retrieve small items expanded to include bringing Zara pens whenever she saw her reaching for a notebook, an endearing habit that suggested both intelligence and a desire to be helpful. When spring arrived, Phoenix experienced her first taste of supervised outdoor exploration, cautiously investigating the area around the cabin while staying close to Zara. Her reaction to the natural world was a blend of instinctive understanding and comical inexperience, stalking leaves with predatory focus, then leaping back in surprise when they moved in the wind. She showed particular fascination with birds, watching them with intense concentration, and attempting to mimic their calls with her own distinctive vocalizations. The most profound moment in Phoenix's recovery came unexpectedly. 6 months after her rescue, Zara had been contacted by a wildlife rehabilitation center about consulting on a litter of orphaned bobcat kittens. When she brought home photos and videos to analyze their behavior, Phoenix showed immediate, intense interest. The calico positioned herself directly in front of the laptop, watching the struggling orphans with unmistakable empathy, her tail twitching and soft trills escaping, as if she were trying to communicate with them across the digital divide. One survivor recognizing and acknowledging others fighting their own battle to live. 1 year after that frigid November night when flames nearly claimed her life, Phoenix had transformed completely. The butterfly marking on her forehead seemed more pronounced against her glossy coat, a symbol of her remarkable metamorphosis. She had grown into a sleek, confident cat who moved with grace despite the slight kink in her tail, the only visible reminder of her traumatic beginning. What remained unchanged were those extraordinary emerald eyes, still shining with the intelligence and resilience that had helped her survive. Zara's life had transformed as well. Her research on wolverines had expanded to include a side project, documenting the psychological recovery of rescued wildlife, inspired by Phoenix's journey. The cabin now featured cat-friendly modifications, climbing shelves along the walls, a window perch for birdwatching, and a custom-built catio that allowed Phoenix to safely experience the outdoors. Most significantly, Zara had become an expert witness in animal cruelty cases across Montana, her testimony helping to secure convictions for those who, like Thaddeus, inflicted deliberate suffering on vulnerable creatures. The 1-year anniversary of the rescue wasn't something Zara had planned to commemorate. It seemed morbid to celebrate such a traumatic event. But when she returned home that evening, she found Phoenix sitting expectantly by the door, the calico's favorite toy mouse placed precisely on the welcome mat like an offering. It was one of Phoenix's endearing habits, bringing gifts to greet Zara's return. But the timing of this particular presentation felt meaningful, as if the cat somehow understood the significance of the date. Phoenix had developed an uncanny ability to sense Zara's emotions, offering comfort during difficult days with gentle headbutts and rumbling purrs. On this anniversary night, as Zara sat reflecting on the chain of events that had brought them together, Phoenix climbed into her lap with deliberate care, placing one paw on Zara's cheek in a gesture that felt remarkably like gratitude. The simple touch held more meaning than any words could have conveyed, acknowledgement of the bond forged in fire and strengthened through healing. Thaddeus Mercer remained in Montana State Prison, his case having become something of a landmark in the state's approach to animal cruelty prosecution. The district attorney had used it to advocate for stronger legislation, citing Phoenix's story as evidence that animal abusers often escalated to more dangerous behavior. When the local newspaper ran a feature on the case's impact, they included a photograph of Phoenix sitting regally in a patch of sunlight, her butterfly marking clearly visible, her emerald eyes gazing directly into the camera with what readers described as old soul wisdom. What continued to amaze Zara was Phoenix's capacity for joy, despite her traumatic beginning. The cat approached each day with enthusiasm, racing through morning victory laps around the cabin, chirping excitedly at birds outside the window, investigating any new object with thorough feline inspection. She showed no lasting fear of humans, greeting Zara's colleagues and friends with cautious interest that quickly turned to demands for attention. It was as if Phoenix had made a conscious choice not to let past suffering define her present experience. Dr. Abernathy, during Phoenix's annual checkup, remarked on this quality. "Animals live in the present in ways humans struggle to achieve," he observed, watching Phoenix confidently explore the examination room she had once cowered in. "But even by those standards, this one's exceptional. She hasn't forgotten what happened. You can see it in how she still startles at certain sounds, but she's chosen not to be ruled by it." The veterinarian's assessment, captured something essential about Phoenix's spirit, a resilience that seemed almost deliberate in its determination. The most powerful legacy of Phoenix's journey emerged unexpectedly through the wildlife rehabilitation connection. Zara began volunteering her cabin as a temporary foster home for rescued kittens awaiting permanent placement. To everyone's surprise, Phoenix revealed an extraordinary talent for nurturing these traumatized youngsters, approaching them with gentle patience, demonstrating eating and grooming behaviors, and providing comfort during thunderstorms or other stress triggers. Her empathy for their fear seemed to transcend typical feline behavior, as if her own experience had given her unique insight into their needs. Phoenix's story spread beyond Blackwater Ridge through Zara's professional network and Dr. Abernathy's veterinary conferences. Other rescue organizations began documenting similar cases of animals who not only recovered from abuse, but went on to help rehabilitate others of their kind. A small research grant was established to study this phenomenon of survivor as healer, with Phoenix as the inspiration. The butterfly-marked calico with emerald eyes had transformed from a victim into a symbol of resilience. Her journey from the edge of flames to flourishing life, offering hope beyond her individual story. In quiet moments, watching Phoenix sleeping peacefully in the evening sunlight, Zara often reflected on the knife edge of chance that had brought them together. A different route home, a few minutes' delay, the decision to investigate a distant bonfire that could easily have been ignored. Sometimes the most profound connections in life hang on such fragile threads of timing and choice. The courage to step into darkness when it would be easier to pass by. The willingness to reach into flames for a life teetering on the edge of existence. In saving Phoenix, Zara had discovered a truth both simple and profound. Compassion is never wasted, and even the smallest actions can create ripples of healing that extend far beyond what we can imagine.